Well done. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. I am Pastor Amanda Zenzalo, and it is my honor to serve at Central Lutheran Church in Northeast Portland, Oregon. Our Sunday services are at 10:15 on Sunday morning, and we have a learning hour at 9 o'clock before that. You can learn more about our congregation at centralportland.org. Pastor Megan is getting ready to be a part of a conference in Canada, and so they are not with us this week and send their greetings. And instead, I am so thankfully joined by.
Hi there. I'm Pastor Dan Tisdell. I'm at First Lutheran Church in Gypsum, Colorado. Gypsum is up in the mountains, sort of near Vail. Everybody knows where Vail is for some reason. We have service. Our worship service is 9 a.m. on Sunday morning, and our just tons of things going on. Wednesday nights we have what we call Wednesday Night Live, which is kind of a fellowship meal, Bible study time to spend together. Our Facebook page and our web page are both all one word, First Lutheran of Gypsum. And our website has been recently updated. It has sermon audio. You can listen to me preach. That's exciting. And we have a few other things that are kind of cool on there. We've started a blog and more updated stuff there. We've got a new youth group that's starting. We do a joint youth group with our Methodist friends in Eagle, and that's been doing really, really great the last few months. So lots of great stuff's going on, and we'd love you to join us.
Very cool. It's always fun to update and keep the website kind of going and current and those kinds of pieces. So good on you. Well done.
Yeah.
So this week we are looking at the fourth Sunday after Epiphany lessons. And if you are finding us at the justlutheran.blogspot.org website, you can look right down here to get a link to go check out those lessons. If you are listening on a podcast or watching on YouTube, the first lesson is Micah chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. And we are just going to kind of give a broad generalization on Micah, and then we're going to be traipsing right on to our second reading, which is 1 Corinthians 1, 18 to 31. And then we are going to jump right to our gospel, the Gospel of Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. And you can write those down, and if you have a Bible near you, open that up and take a look at what we're talking about, or just sit back, relax, grab yourself a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and settle in to see what we come up with, because you never know what you're going to get when it's Bible study that doesn't suck.
At least it doesn't suck.
Hopefully it doesn't suck. Look, I'm
Yeah,
back in my
generally.
office. I haven't been in my office in a long time, so we haven't seen desk toys recently. Check out this desk toy. This is
Oh, that's awesome.
totally made of Play-Doh.
Did a child make that for you?
Yes! And
I
look,
figured. I don't get any of that stuff.
it
Nobody
even
ever.
has a purse,
Oh my goodness.
right?
That is awesome.
Yes, yes, it is. So,
Well, you have desk toys at your when you do go from home, but this is a whole new
a whole new
level.
level. And
Yeah.
look, it has wings because apparently pigs now fly.
Well, I can make a political statement, but I'll leave it at that.
So, giving a momentary nod to our political state and things that are going on, let's talk about this week's lessons and the fabulous things that we have to hear. So the lesson from Micah is one that folks might be familiar with, might not be familiar with, because it has one of those what I like to call crochet verses, or counted cross stitch verses in it, which is my really somewhat irreverent way of saying that it has a verse that you could like make a cross stitch or embroider on and then hang on your wall, and then you would feel like you're really interacting with scripture while safely containing it in a frame. So the scripture verse that really gets safely contained in a frame a lot of times, but is well and often used, particularly by folks like myself who are justice oriented, is the last verse of this selection, which is verse 8. And it goes like this: God has told you, O mortal, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. Now, having said that, Dan, what comes before all of that?
I was about to say, like, I have my own, favorite, what would you say, cross stitch catchphrase ones, like, oh man, so many of them. This is one of those. But when you read the stuff before it, it really lays out, like, that verse is great. I don't want to take anything away from that verse, but the verses that lead into it sort of are a little bit more. There's a little bit more responsibility involved, right? Um, what does the Lord require of you? And if you see what is being said, it's sort of condemning people that think they have it all right and then they don't. And they think, well, it's all about doing sacrifice, or it's all about doing these different things. And one of the things I say in a broad way about Christianity is it's so simple, but it's not easy, right?
Nice.
In a broad way, it's so simple. And I think if you can boil this down, that last verse is really what it is. God says, look, all we have to do is these three things. It's not complicated, right? Love each other, do justice, right? But that's not easy. It's simple, but not easy, right?
It's so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the verses before this, you really get this sense of, the majesty of God, and God has done these amazing things for us and all this awesomeness, and God has provided these wonderful things. And then what can we do to give thanks to God? And they start with like little stuff as far as sacrifices, like can I bring you a burnt offering? Can I bring you a calf? Can I bring you 1,000 rams, 1,000 rivers of oil? Like it just keeps escalating,
Yeah.
like bigly escalating. And then all of a sudden you have, the response saying, I'm not asking you to sacrifice your firstborn child. I'm asking you to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. And exactly like you said, it might be easy to say, but it is probably the hardest thing in the world to do.
Sort of ironically, which would be easier if you had 1,000 riverfuls of oil to give your 1,000 riverfuls of oil, or to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly? Like,
Well, it's the difference between charity and solidarity,
yeah, yeah.
right? I mean, for those who are unfamiliar with that kind of juxtaposition, charity is the ability to like give money towards something, but you don't ever have to get your hands dirty, and you don't ever have to actually smell the smells of the situation. Whereas
Right.
solidarity, you got to show up and you're going to smell the dump while you're going through it to see the children. Right?
Well, I like to say it's being present, and that helping doesn't help. Like, helping is a Band-Aid. When you say, oh, I'm going to help by doing this, by giving money, but it's about making relationships. If it's not about making relationships, then ultimately it's very temporary.
And not to say that giving money is wrong, right? We don't want to
No, no, no.
villainize charity or villainize giving money, when sometimes that's all we're able to do is to give of our resources and give, and that's really important. And if you have the relationship still within that opportunity to give financial means, that's what we're really hoping for,
Right.
right? So
Yep.
we both, before we started the video, Dan and I were talking about, that this is kind of the catchphrase of this, but then how do we do these things? How do we actually do justice and love kindness and walk humbly? And that leads us to our next scriptures. So we're going to hop on over to 1 Corinthians. And Pastor Dan, you wanted to talk some about 1 Corinthians and how it spoke to you. So go for it. You're up.
Well, this is one of my, in terms of it's definitely not a crochet verse. I'm going to use that now. I'm going to use that a lot, by the way.
And it's odd because I don't know if you can crochet a verse. I mean, but it's so much faster to say crochet than counted cross stitch.
Cross stitch, right? Exactly. Yeah.
Right, so I don't know.
It's not a cross stitch crochet kind of a phrase, but it's really good, because I think this passage, and also when we talk about the gospel, they're very countercultural kind of messages. And not just countercultural now, but even from the time of Christ and the time of when Paul is writing this, that the message of the cross is foolishness, right? This message of humility, of laying down one's life. It's not about wealth and a power. It's about a different kind of power. It's about the power in humility. It's the power in making yourself literally last, not putting yourself first. And so that comes through in this First Corinthians passage. I have sort of I kind of have a back and forth relationship with Paul. Like, there are things that, some of the best things written, I think, in my opinion, in the entire Bible are written by Paul. And some of the worst things written in the entire Bible are written by Paul. This, if you read, this is one of those, it's not that long of a passage, 18 to 31, but this, very, on my Bible, it's half a page. There's a lot in there. There's a lot of depth in there. There's a lot of sort of what I would say, kind of universal truth.
There's so much. It's just packed, and it's so unfair that we get these 3 readings all together in the same week, because they're
right.
all packed like this.
And what I really love about, I mentioned this again before we were on the air. Someday we should like have an outtakes tape of the conversation.
Oh Lord, no.
Today was an interesting one. So I, again, with our lectionary, sometimes I really like the lectionary. Sometimes I think lectionary gets a little bogged down. But there's definitely a theme here, and the theme is this, kind of what we said with Micah, that it's about being humble. All of these are tied in with being. What does it mean to serve? What does it mean to live out our faith? And it starts with humility. It starts with taking care of other people, putting other people first, and that sort of weaves its way through all 3 of these readings in very different ways. But again, like we said in Micah, it's easy to say. It's very difficult to actually live that way. So especially when it's contrary to our culture.
I think the piece that I was really caught by as we were talking about this in my text study yesterday was, so a couple weeks ago, not this last week, but the week before, I picked up the part of the "What are you looking for?" of the Gospel of John passage, and really kind of played with that idea, like, what are you looking for? And when Jesus asked that question of the disciples, I really hear that, like, what you look for is what you see in the world. And so if you're looking for everyone to be against you, you're totally going to see everyone against you. If you're looking, when my husband was looking to buy a car, all of a sudden all he saw on the road were Jeeps. Like, every single car that passed by him suddenly was a Jeep. And the week before that, every single car that passed by him was a small utility truck. Like, so whatever he was looking for was what he was seeing. And I spent some time pondering what that meant, that what the disciples and what the world was looking for in a Messiah was a person of violence, was a person who would come in and, through military force, take over the environment and cleanse the government area.
There's some evidence even in the Gospels that that the disciples probably were, at least the majority of the disciples probably were expecting something like that too. They were expecting Jesus to start a revolution.
Yeah.
Because the times when he was most sort of counter to the authority were the times that they were all, let's go Jesus, rah, rah,
That's right.
rah. And the times when he was saying, you don't, that's not really what I'm about, were the times they were really confused. Like, wait a second, aren't you, isn't this about something where you're going to take over, you're going to be the king, and we're, and so I often will like pick on the disciples and say, well, they just don't get it a lot of the time. Well, that's true to a certain degree.
Yeah, they didn't. And
but like you just said, they got it more when they heard the message they wanted to hear. Right.
And when they understood, because it fit what they were looking for.
Right, exactly. When Jesus' message was off of what they were hoping for, that's when they kind of wait, hold on a second, what are you talking about here? That's where they really don't get it, often, time and time again in the
So
gospel.
what I remember then when I'm reading this First Corinthians passage and we hear this, the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. I think of that moment when Jesus is telling his closest disciples, like, I'm going to be turned over to the authorities and I am going to die and then I will be raised up again. And Peter says, don't say that stuff. Like, you're being bloody weird. Like, knock it off. You're talking about dying and, we're not about that. We are about, and Jesus's response is, get behind me, Satan, get behind me, temptation. Like, don't pull me towards this version of the Messiah that you're looking for, because that's not who God is calling me to be. And what I'm saying is going to sound really foolish. Like, why would I let myself be arrested? Why would I let myself be tortured? Why would I let myself be killed? Right? It goes completely against everything, and it sounds really dumb. But trust me on this one, it's the better way to go, because you're going to get more out of me doing this than if I was another revolutionary.
Well, and if you look historically, it's like we, the world, hasn't really learned their lesson in thousands and thousands of years. You look at the people that really made a difference in people's lives. It really changed our our cultural consciousness. They weren't the leaders that were using their wealth or their power to dominate people. They were people like Martin Luther King Jr., who sat down to protest, who had peaceful marches. It was people like that. It was countercultural. The power is in the humility, is in the peace, is in that seeking justice from Micah, right? Um, it's ironic that the people who think they have the most power often don't. Um, well, how do I word that? That's
And
not
it's
exactly
still
right.
subversive, though, because if
Mhm.
we tend to clean up Martin Luther King Jr. and some others and try to kind of take away some of the power of their subversiveness. This last week, it was very interesting. I'm using this book to work with my youth on learning about Jesus. It's called Manga Messiah. Ooh, the glare off the screen is pretty
Wow.
bright. Okay, so this is the book, and it's the gospel told with, like, manga, like Japanese
Yeah.
cartoon type stuff. And I asked the students who were there this last week, what did you read this last week? What are you confused about? What questions do you have? Open up a page, tell me what you want to know. And they pulled out this section. And can you tell what's going on in here? I'm going to try to set it so that you
I
can kind of
can't quite
see.
tell.
So this is,
Oh, it's the in the temple, the destruction of the temple.
you got it. So this is
Awesome.
this is when
The money
he
changers.
shows up and he gets angry at the money changers and he smashes what's going on outside of the temple. And
Right.
the question of the students was, why did he get so angry and why did he start destroying things? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I think sometimes we like to say that the peaceful protest part of Jesus was a person of peace and Jesus was humble. Jesus also, when there were people being taken advantage of and harmed, Jesus also cracked the whip, literally.
Well, I think the that scene in the Bible is really telling. He was definitely a revolutionary. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And it wasn't all about peaceful protest, but there were, I think in particular, that the money changers tempers had two very important purposes. It wasn't that Jesus is a violent person as a whole. The first purpose was the people were being taken advantage of. So there's a justice issue, right?
Yep.
They are having to change their money into the temple money because they won't take the Roman money, and they were charging exorbitant fees for that. They were also charging exorbitant fees for the animals to be sacrificed, which was, and Jesus basically saying, this is not what we're doing. Ironically, interestingly, it's kind of similar thing when in the Reformation, when Luther was saying you can't charge people for this. This is not faith. But the secondary part of the money changers scene, which I think is really important, is from the moment he enters Jerusalem, he's trying. Okay, so I think I've said this before, at least on Palm Sunday. He's trying to sort of piss off the leadership, especially the Roman leadership, right? Because the Roman governor historically would be, most of the year would be stationed at Caesarea by the Sea, which is not that, it's off a distance from Jerusalem, except for Passover week. So we know that they historically would parade into Jerusalem with this big show of force, this big show of power. The Roman governor would be on a big war horse with armor and a sword, and there'd be centurions behind him and all these forces, and they would occupy Jerusalem for the time of Passover, which was this time. So part of this comes from the Last Week by Dominic Crossan. That's one of my favorite sort of books about this. But taken in that context, if that happened typically on the first day of Passover, which at that point is what we refer to as Palm Sunday, roughly that same time, Jesus walking in his own parade from the other gate on a donkey instead of a war horse with palms and stuff, it's revolutionary. It's sort of a very contrary saying, well, look, you can follow that sort of power, or you can follow this sort of power, which is based out of humility. And so it wasn't just this peaceful, oh look, Jesus and big party. Jesus was trying to make people mad, because he's kind of mocking the Roman governor by doing this. And then the next day, or sometime within the next 48 hours or so, he goes in the temple and overturns these money changers tables. So he already knows the path he's going to end up on the cross, and Jesus is consciously paving the way, and he's paving this way not as this leader of, I'm going to take over and kill everybody and rise up an army, but I'm going to get them so mad at me for not really doing anything illegal. I'm going to get them so mad they're going to put me to death as an innocent person, and this is going to be a model for what real leadership is about. Real leadership is about sacrifice.
And I think that is the summary of this First Corinthians passage, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, like, we have this whole thing where we have this juxtaposition of this understanding of what makes the kind of leader that we're looking for in this world, and what makes the kind of leader that Jesus is and becomes, and what makes the kind of leader that we tend to lift up, and what we're trying to strive for.
Yep, absolutely.
So if that's, the leadership model now, so we have what are we supposed to do, and then how are we supposed to do it, which is kind of what this First Corinthians, so the Micah tells us what we're supposed to be doing. The Corinthians tells us how we do this, right, through the power of the cross, and in ways that look really foolish to the world, and in ways that defy and are countercultural and are subversive. Sometimes they look really peaceful, and sometimes they look a little hooligan-y, but in any which way, this is how we do these things. So Matthew, I think, tells us, like, the heart of why we do these things, and this dream of what we're aiming for, and how the world is going to look once this kind of leadership is the norm, and once we all manage to walk in this way with God, then here is what the world looks like. Here is what the kingdom of God looks like. And here in Matthew chapter 5, which we're going to have for several weeks now in a row, we're going to be hanging out in chapter 5 of Matthew, I believe, until we hit Lent, right?
Yep, I think so.
So I think we have a different reading for Transfiguration, but for the next several weeks, we chill in this portion of Matthew. And it's this part that people refer to sometimes as the Sermon on the Mount. So for those of us who don't know what that means, because we didn't grow up in the church, Yo. It's just this really long section where it's a big, long teaching of Jesus while he's on a mountainside. He goes up to a mountain and he preaches to them. In Luke, it's called the Sermon on the Plain because he's on the plains, but they match up. They're pretty similar. There are slight differences between the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain, but they're very, very similar to one another. They go along with one another. So we believe that this is a section of Matthew and Luke that comes from a source. Here's your nerdy section that comes from a source called Q, which is for the word quell, which means what? So
Worse.
so we have, which means source. So we have so when Matthew and Luke were sitting down to write their gospels, they had Mark on one hand, and then we believe, because things are so similar and Matthew and Luke are in like completely different regions of the world when they're writing at approximately the same decade, we believe that they had something called the source or Q that next to them. So that's where the overlaps start to kind of hang out together. Ooh, you have a graph. Say
I
something.
don't know. Do I have to say something to see it? There's a graph of that, what you just said. There's the sources of Matthew and Luke are Mark and Q, and Matthew also had outside sources, and Luke had outside sources. I usually refer to, it's easier to sort of think of outside sources. You know, I mean, one way I'll say is, well, the birth narratives are not in Mark, so the stories about Jesus' birth are not in Mark, but they are in Matthew and Luke, but Matthew and Luke have totally different stories about his birth. So that's one of the most obvious sort of examples of the sources that aren't Mark or Q. But this is still a tough concept for a lot of people. But
hopefully it makes some sense.
yeah,
It's just one of those random little pieces we'll toss out there and hope that it doesn't suck. But this is the Sermon on the Mount, and this is kind of the beginning. It's not kind of the beginning. This is the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. And this is another section that could be totally turned into count and cross stitch, and has been turned into that. There's plenty of kitsch versions of this that you can find at your local Christian supply store. And for some, that's really awesome. And for some, it might not be as helpful, right? So, but when we take this down off the wall and we take it out from behind the glass and we give it some space to breathe instead of trying to contain it to something that can be pretty, and try to take a look at what it means for actual living, it's pretty crazy.
well, and these are all, you know, there's no list, there's nowhere on the list that say, blessed are those who have a whole lot of land and money and possessions and title. It doesn't say that. It's all of the list is all people that live humbly, that do justice, that love mercy, and walk humbly with their God. This is that list.
Yeah.
I have two I promise I know we're running a little short on time. I have two quick stories. The first one is when I was confirmed, we were told to pick one of these to preach on. This is a short sermon. And I think that's a really great idea, because each one of these, each one of the Beatitudes is actually, you have to sort of really think and process them, because they're not, yeah, count and cross stitch would be great, but every one of them has their little sort of, catches in there where you go, wait, hold on, let me think about that for a second. What does that really mean?
Each one of them bites just a little bit.
Yep. And the other little tiny story is I was in two different productions of the musical Godspell, and when this scene comes up in Godspell, the characters all are just sort of happy, going, "Oh, blessed are the poor in spirit," and they're sort of dancing and screaming and singing, and it's great. And when it comes down to verse 11, the character that plays Judas, which was me, says, "Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account." And that doing that line, playing Judas, saying that to Jesus, was deeply profound for me, because a lot of people read that and they say, well, it's about, those people that are anti-Christian, and it's about ISIS, and I'm like, no, it's about us too. It's about us reviling other types of Christians or reviling people in our own churches, or it's about because of their faith. or picking on people because what do you mean you read the Bible every morning? I mean, you know, like we hear that even within our own churches. And for me to say that to the guy playing Jesus was like a big thing for me. It really affected my faith. Um, yeah, so I love the Beatitudes.
Do
Love
you have
them.
a favorite?
I preached on Blessed are the Peacemakers, and that's still a favorite. That's still a favorite.
Do you remember what the heart of it was?
I of my sermon from ninth grade.
Uh-huh.
You're really asking me.
I'm
Um,
really asking you.
I said I'm still probably in this sort of same place that peace is the end all to most of our faith. Like a lot of people want to do away with sharing of the peace in church or limit it, because it's really just a big glad hand, see how everybody's doing, have conversations. I'm like, you know what? But there's something, not just the title of it, not just because we say it's sharing of the peace, but because we really are wishing peace on people. That ultimately the end result, the end goal of most of our faith is peace. It's if we love each other, if we take care of each other, if we do justice, we love mercy, we walk humbly. Ultimately, our goal is peace. Our goal is to sit and be in the presence of God, and just be at peace. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at. So, do you have a favorite?
I love this section. I also really like it in the Gospel of Luke because I really like the woe section. So in Luke, you have not just the blessed are, but woe to section. So it's got this nice like balance of law and gospel to it. The in the Matthew section, like next week's text is my ordination text, so I particularly love it. But the in the Beatitudes, the one that's really so the Beatitudes are the blessings. So for folks who are wondering why we use that word, it's a word that means blessings, and all of these verses start with blessed are the, or blessed are they, or blessed are those.
In some translations, they say "happy are they," but I actually almost prefer "blessed" because it's not an identical kind of a word. But
Yeah, totally. And I think that piece about like each of these having a little bite to it and a little bit of venom in them, I think is really important to recognize, and especially in the translation, like in the Greek, there's a little bit of like stuff underneath there that's
yeah,
pretty fascinating. The one that has been catching my personal heart recently or in the last few years is, I think I'm looking here, verse 8. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And I think that goes back as well to what I was talking about with the Gospel of John and what are you looking for? And when we are looking for God in other people, we're going to see God in other people. When we're looking for enemy in another person, we're going to see enemy in another person. And I love that kind of call and that challenge, not necessarily to be pure in heart, meaning that all of my thoughts and intentions are going to be beautiful, or I'm not going to ever hate anyone, or I'm not going to ever have thoughts in my head that might not seem Christian. I hate that judgment when we say, I'm not being Christian well, you are a person who believes in God, therefore you're a Christian. Like, move past that. But I get that internal blame, and I do it too. I just will always call people on it if they say it around me. But that call to, from the heart, be looking for God in other people. And when I am looking for God in other people, I see God in other people. Like I can see the beauty and the holy in someone else. And so that challenge for me, I think, is one that I think oftentimes it, because it's so short, it just kind of flies through, and we don't always spend a little bit of time on that one. But for me personally, that one's been sitting for a bit.
and don't we all know people that are, everyone's out to get them kind of people where they expect the worst in people, and so they get the worst. That's it.
Absolutely.
And I have this. I've referred to this. I think even on here, I have this list of rules. I made my own list of rules for my own life, and I put them on the back of my door. And one of them is expect the best out of people. And trust people. From the very start. And of all of those rules, that's the one that my mother says you can't do that. You're going to get people to take advantage of you. And I'm like,
Mhm.
some people will take advantage of me. Absolutely. But if I start there, if I don't start there, then how can we ever develop, love and mutual respect,
Yeah.
you know? And
So hard.
we just have to be willing to admit that sometimes people will take advantage of us if we go in. I'm going to totally misquote scripture. If we need to go in with what is it? Hearts or eyes like lambs, not like, I don't even know where that's from, but I know that's biblical because I'm a pastor.
Well, and I think that there's also a sign of privilege in that, right? That we
Yeah.
have the capacity to walk into something with the open heart and assuming the best from people. That when that is something that we have as a privilege, because we are those who come from that place of privilege, um, then it's even more of our call to walk
It's not
into
as
the
easy for
situation.
someone who's a person of color or a LGBTQ person to do. I recognize that for sure.
Right? And but for those of us who do sit in, like, I fully will own the fact that I can take advantage of that walking into a situation and trusting people from the beginning. Um Whereas I would not necessarily want a young child of color to walk in quite that way. I would,
Right.
it would be okay for them to walk in with suspicion, and then it falls even more on me to be able and open to have a heart that is open to see the good in people. Um, Not to take advantage of that privilege, but to own that privilege and to enter into the world, utilizing that to make the world a better place rather than just assuming it and not paying attention to the good that can come from using that.
Absolutely.
So,
And I see the good in you, Amanda.
and I see the good in you, Dan. And I see the good in the next things that are on my calendar, which means it's time for me to get going. And I believe that Pastor Dan has worship later this evening as well.
I do. All
So,
right.
thank you for joining us here on Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. We will be back with you soon. Thanks for hanging around. We hope that you have some time to recognize where you fit into the Beatitudes, that you spend some time being challenged by the foolishness of the gospel so that you can go and do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with God so that God's kingdom will come one step closer this week. Thanks for being with us. Bye bye.
Bye.